At 65, the tragedy of Colin Firth is beyond heartbreaking. He spent 30 years playing the calmest man in the room, the husband who never raised his voice, the king who conquered a stutter, the spy who stayed composed while the world burned around him. And for just as long, audiences assumed that calm was real, that somewhere behind the awards and the accent and the perfectly tailored suits, Colin Firth's life looked as steady as the characters he played. It didn't. Behind one of Britain's most trusted faces was a 22-year marriage that quietly came apart, a public scandal he never asked for, and a career that had to find a new shape once the leading man roles stopped arriving. This is the real story, not the tabloid version, not the rumor version, just what actually happened. Colin Firth was born in Grayshot, Hampshire in 1960, into a family built on ideas rather than performance. His father taught history. His mother studied comparative religion. Both of his parents had spent parts of their own childhoods overseas, and that academic, somewhat itinerant upbringing shaped a boy who was thoughtful, watchful, and not especially interested in the spotlight. Acting found him almost by accident, through a comprehensive school production and then formal training at Drama Centre London. He was not, by his own later accounts, an instant star. Early auditions were as often rejections as triumphs. What set him apart, according to directors and critics who worked with him in those years, was restraint, an ability to suggest a great deal of feeling while doing very little on the surface. That quality became his signature. When he played Mr. Darcy in the BBC's 1995 adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, it turned him into a genuine cultural phenomenon almost overnight, the kind of role that reshapes how an entire country pictures romantic reserve. The Bridget Jones films built on that image a few years later, casting him as Mark Darcy, the reliable, undemonstrative man who loves patiently and never makes a scene. By the time he won the Academy Award for Best Actor in 2011 for The King's Speech, playing King George VI as he struggled to overcome a stammer, Firth had built one of the most respected careers in British film. The role carried a certain irony that critics noted at the time. An actor celebrated for portraying a man who could barely get his private struggles into words was, by most accounts, a fairly private man himself. His personal life, for a long time, looked like an extension of that stability. He met Italian producer Livia Gigioli in 1996 while working on the British-Italian television drama Nostromo, where she worked as a production assistant. They married in 1997. Together they raised two sons, Luca and Matteo, dividing their time between London and the Umbrian countryside in Italy. Firth is also the father of an older son, Will, from an earlier relationship with actress Meg Tilly. For roughly 2 decades, the Firth-Gigioli marriage was presented, and largely perceived, as one of the steadier ones in an industry not known for steady marriages. Livia built a public identity of her own during this time as an outspoken advocate for sustainable and ethical fashion, later founding the Green Carpet Fashion Awards and earning an MB in 2019 for her work in the field. What the public did not know for years was that the marriage had already been through a serious rupture. Between 2015 and 2016, Livia and Colin went through a period of separation. During that time, Livia became involved with Marco Brancaccia, an Italian journalist and childhood friend. The relationship ended in the middle of 2016. According to Brancaccia's own later account, given to the press, the contact after the breakup amounted to 2 messages and an email, one of which he sent to Colin directly, describing the affair, a message he later said he regretted. Livia, however, filed a stalking complaint against him. In 2018, Italian authorities charged Brancaccia with stalking, and prosecutors said at the time they believed there was enough evidence to proceed to trial. Later that same year, the Firths and Brancaccia reached a private, undisclosed settlement, and all parties agreed to make no further public statements about the case. For a while, that settlement effectively closed the story, but it left behind a complicated set of facts that didn't fully align with the narrative that had circulated in the press, a narrative of a devoted husband standing beside his wife against an aggressor. The affair itself had been consensual, taking place during a period when the couple was separated, and the full context only became clear gradually, through Brancaccia's public statements and subsequent reporting. None of this played out as a tabloid explosion. There was no dramatic press conference, no viral confrontation. It surfaced in fragments over months, the way private pain often does when it becomes public property. In December 2019, Colin and Livia's representatives confirmed to the press that the couple had separated after 22 years of marriage. Their statement was brief and carefully worded. They had separated, they remained close friends, and they were united in their love for their children. They asked for privacy and said there would be no further comment. There was no bitterness in the language, no blame assigned in public. The divorce was finalized in 2021, during the same stretch of years the entire world spent locked down by the pandemic, a period that, for almost everyone, stripped away routine and left more room than usual for reflection. For Firth, an actor whose calendar had been built for decades around film shoots, press tours, and premieres, that sudden absence of structure arrived at the same moment his marriage of over 2 decades was ending for good. What makes this particular story unusual isn't collapse, it's what came after. Firth and Gigioli did not disappear into a bitter, silent divorce. In interviews given years later, Livia described their relationship as close, even unusually so. She has spoken about the two of them attending events together along with their respective new partners, calling the arrangement an extended family rather than a broken one. She is now married to Scottish climate activist Callum Grieve, confirming the marriage publicly in late 2025. She has also spoken about supporting Arsenal Football Club as a shared ritual that survived the divorce intact, something she has described as one of the constants the family kept. Colin, for his part, has remained almost entirely private about his own romantic life since the separation, giving no interviews about it and confirming no details, which is consistent with the reserved public posture he has held for most of his career. While his personal life was quietly restructuring itself, his professional life was going through its own transition, a much slower, less dramatic one, but no less real. Hollywood has never been especially patient with leading men once they pass a certain age, and Firth, moving through his 50s and into his 60s, watched the type of role that had defined his career for years become harder to find. The romantic leads that once came naturally started going to younger actors. The industry itself was changing too, as streaming platforms reshaped how films got made and marketed, and as a performer's online visibility became part of how studios measured value. A shift Firth, by nature reserved and largely absent from the promotional machinery of social media, never fully entered. He did not vanish from the screen. The Kingsman franchise gave him a commercially successful, long-running role as the composed, lethal spy Harry Hart, a part that kept him visible to a wide audience even as it operated in a different register than the award-season dramas that built his reputation. He continued working steadily in the years that followed, appearing in films like Empire of Light and returning to one of his most familiar roles in Bridget Jones' Mad About the Boy. None of it carried the cultural weight of Pride and Prejudice or The King's Speech, and that is, by most honest accounts, simply how aging works for actors who built their name on being the romantic or dramatic center of a story. The parts on offer shift toward mentors, fathers, and figures of authority. It is rarely announced. It happens gradually, in the space between one script and the next. The most recent chapter of his career brought a different kind of difficulty, one that had nothing to do with age or box office, and everything to do with the weight of a real tragedy. In January 2025, Firth starred in Lockerbie, A Search for Truth, a 5-part Sky and Peacock series based on the book by Dr. Jim Swire, whose daughter Flora was among the 270 people killed in the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 in December 1988. Firth played Swire, portraying his decades-long campaign to uncover what he believed was the full truth behind the attack, a campaign that led Swire to question the official case against convicted Libyan national Abdelbasset al-Megrahi and, controversially, to argue that al-Megrahi had been wrongly convicted. The series drew serious criticism from some victims' families almost immediately. Michelle Shula-Lipkin, whose father Frank Shula died in the bombing, told reporters that the show risked spreading misinformation by centering Swire's contested theory about who was really responsible, and objected specifically to a line suggesting al-Megrahi was, in effect, another victim of the bombing. Kathleen Kamak, a spokesperson for a Separate Victims Foundation, said the series glorified one family's interpretation of events while sidelining the accounts of hundreds of other families who lost people that night. Sky responded publicly, saying it had engaged with victims' families during production, that the drama did not claim to offer a definitive account, and that every episode carried a warning about potentially distressing content. Firth himself did not weigh into the public dispute, leaving the producers to respond to the criticism directly. It was, in its own way, a strange echo of his own life. An actor known for restraint playing another man's very public, very controversial pursuit of truth, while his own recent history had taught him exactly how complicated public narratives about private matters could become. None of this adds up to a scandal in the way that word usually gets used. There was no arrest, no addiction story, no explosive confession, nothing built for a tabloid comeback narrative. What happened to Colin Firth over the past decade was quieter than that, and in some ways harder to sum up in a single headline. A marriage that ended after 22 years, following a period of separation, an affair, and a stalking case that got legally complicated before it got resolved. A divorce finalized in the isolating middle of a global pandemic. A career that shifted, as most long careers eventually do, from leading man to something more supporting, more reflective, and most recently, a role that put him back in the middle of a real family's grief, and its ongoing arguments over how that grief should be told on screen. What stands out, looking at the full record, is what didn't happen. He didn't give the tell-all interview. He didn't publicly blame Livia, or Brancaccia, or the industry that gave fewer leading roles to actors his age. The public record shows two people who went through something genuinely painful and difficult, and who, by every account since, chose to stay connected for the sake of their sons rather than turn the divorce into a public fight. That is not a small thing, and it is not the same as saying nothing was lost. 22 years, a shared life across two countries, a public image built in part on the idea of a stable marriage. All of that changed, in ways that were reported carefully and, for the most part, respectfully, by a press that had spent decades treating Firth as close to untouchable. At 65, Colin Firth is neither the cultural fixture he was in the years right after the King's Speech, nor is he a cautionary tale. He is something more ordinary and, in its own way, more interesting. A well-known actor who went through a very public divorce and a genuinely difficult career transition, and who came out the other side still working, still largely private, and still on good enough terms with his ex-wife to show up to family events together. Whether that counts as a happy ending or simply a survivable one probably depends on what you think a happy ending is supposed to look like after 22 years and 2 children and a very public 30-year career. What do you think? Does staying quiet and dignified through something like this take more strength than speaking out? Or does it just mean the pain never gets a real outlet? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this one, don't forget to like and subscribe.